I'm really excited that Blair is here. As you heard me say this morning, early this morning, Blair reminded me it's almost 3 years to the day, or the week, from the release of the broadband plan, of which he's executive. Was he the executive director? I think it was called the Omnibus Broadband Initiative, which I keep referring to as the National Broadband Plan. And then, of course, before that, he was chief of staff to Reed Hunt back during the Clinton administration. He's now a fellow with the Aspen Institute's Communications and Society program. So I'm just going to say this. Blair's heard me say it before, but it's important to me. Blair's been a good friend for a long time. He knows, that, and I know we don't always agree. I may not agree with a lot of what he's going to say right now, but I always appreciate having you here. I'm glad to have your perspective, and I'm especially grateful for your friendship. I'm going to do something usually you do at the end, I know, but I forgot earlier. I was going to give Senator Rubio this umbrella emblazoned with the Free State Foundation just as a token of gratefulness for his being here. I was going to give Commissioner Pai this beautiful coaster emblazoned with the Free State Foundation to thank him for being here. I didn't do either one of those things, so I'm going to give you Senator Rubio's umbrella and Senator Pai's coaster, and I want you to treasure these things, or at least get them out of the door. Okay. Welcoming Blair, please. Down.
There we go. Thank you very much for that. It is either a very brave or a very foolish thing for a foundation dedicated to what we might think of as conservative ideas to invite a liberal to summarize and close. But I will say it's been a really great delight to be here. On behalf of Senator Rubio, I have to accept this. It's quite wonderful. And on behalf of all the speakers, I want to say I've spoken at a lot of telecom wonky conferences. This is the first conference where I've ever shared the dais with a group of speakers for whom the average number of votes they're likely to receive in the next Iowa caucuses is greater than 0. So this is really it is a great pleasure, and I really enjoyed Senator Rubio's speech. I'm not sure if everyone got the joke the same way I did when Tom Talkie said it was amazing how substantive he was. It was almost like he was a member of the House. Tom was reflecting his own bias as a House member, but I agree with that. I thought it was a very substantive speech, and particularly one I enjoyed because it had a spirit of optimism about it, particularly about what the technology can do. And that's certainly something that I think all of us in the room share. It is not widely shared in the entire world, and in fact, even in this country now, there's a great debate going on about whether technology actually can lead to the kind of innovation that increases jobs and improves education, improves healthcare. And I think one of the important things that we all share in common, whatever our views are, is we have to have a spirit of techno-optimism, but we have to get out there and prove it. And we have to do it, as you said, by actually making the right choices. Now, as to what the right choices are, I always come to Randy's conferences and leave terribly confused because there's been a lot of challenging to my own thinking as we do this. I've enjoyed recently, of course, we're all reading Nate Silver for the sake of his NCAA picks, but his recent book, The Signal and the Noise, has a wonderful chapter on political punditry, which discusses why political punditry is so bad. You really are better off just flipping a coin rather than listening to the pundits. But part of the reason, and this goes not just to political punditry, is that there are two kinds of folks who make predictions. As he points out, one you might think of as the hedgehog who knows one thing, the other is the fox who knows many things. The hedgehog is very problematic as a matter of prediction, because unlike the fox, they aren't nuanced, they don't react to data, they aren't open-minded. But the problem that Nate doesn't point out is in the world of politics and in the world of trying to drive policy, it almost requires that you act like a hedgehog but think like a fox. That you have to be simultaneously very clear about vision and move forward in certain ways with a very clear and compelling vision, and yet be able to respond to data as it comes in. And that's actually a very, very difficult thing. I might note that there were certain cliches that you get in conferences. One cliche that occurred in this conference, and I'm not saying that's critically because I believe it's true, which is we have no idea what the future is. Every other year you get a completely different cliche, which is we need regulatory certainty. And it is the oscillation between the fact that we don't really know what the future is, but if you're going to provide regulatory certainty, you actually have to make some decisions, which causes a lot of the problems. And so as I listened to the talks, I think there were a lot of great ideas discussed, a lot of very important facts were brought out, but I think we're always going to keep drifting between these things. And so what I'd like to do is just very quickly, kind of in the spirit of Homeland or Downton Abbey, which as far as I can tell, all of my friends come into one or two categories. They either watch one or the other, and a few watch both. You end the season with kind of a dramatic preview of the dangers ahead. I'd like to just mention three scenarios that I think are ahead that were vaguely referred to in this in the previous panels and speeches, but I think I want to point out kind of where the oscillation is or where the tension is. One thing the first panel seemed to agree on, and I certainly agree on, is policy should really focus on investment. That really is the benchmark. If we're investing more, we're going to have faster, better, cheaper broadband. That's the way it works. On the second panel, there seemed to be a consensus that wireless competes with wired. But here's what I think we're going to see in 2014. Here's where that question will meet, where the rubber will meet the road. First of all, while I think the FCC did some very good things in terms of USF reform, I have not seen it lead to more investment. And I think that we're going to have to confront the reality of that. Maybe it will, but it certainly hasn't yet. And this is going to be particularly difficult when what we're going to see is, as 4G gets to rural America, as well it should, and it takes away some of the residential lines, where wireless doesn't compete with wired is what we might think of the institutional uses, so the schools, town halls, healthcare facilities, any kind of businesses. And so what happens in rural America, where we actually kind of get a somewhat of a bifurcation, where residential folks may be perfectly happy to go off with wireless, but that undercuts the economic viability of the larger pipes that are needed for certain kinds of uses. Very tricky problem. I obviously don't have an answer. Stay tuned for next year. Maybe Randy's conference will be covering that. A second thing I thought was really interesting was Senator Rubio referred to the increasing importance of technology in our lives, and that's absolutely right. And I think that's why I agree with Chairman Powell when he says, if there was one problem we really should focus on, it is getting the 100 million online. And I think, again, there are some good things happening. Today's New York Times talks about a new advertising effort. But I got to tell you, I don't, as a predictive matter, I don't think it'll succeed. There are various reasons for that I won't go into, but my point is I think we're going to have that same problem a year from now. And so the division, the gap, and this isn't just a problem for the individuals, it's also a problem for our society. It's going to be, my sister, who was a school teacher, pointed out to me about 6 years ago, she really had a big problem teaching third grade, giving homework, because, you know, about 2/3 of the kids had internet, but a third didn't. How do they do it? How do you give out homework when you want the kids to be utilizing the internet, because it's obviously very efficient, but a third of the kids don't have access to it? So those kinds of problems in terms of how we do Social Security or Medicare, all kinds of different things, we really do need for our own sake to get everybody on, but we really don't have a path yet to do that. A third thing, and I was really delighted, there's obviously now a consensus that whether we refer to it as Bob Quinn's petition or the transition to IP or however you want to call it, there is a consensus that we ought to be moving there to deal with the issues, and I certainly agree that we have to stop forcing investment into obsolete networks, and the government owes it to the companies to give them a date certain. But what I would say is what we're really seeing there is that the social contracts, which were the basis of investment for the telephone networks back 100 years ago, for the cable networks 30 or 40 years ago, for wireless networks, the social contract has basically, the economics have basically fallen apart, or to use Tom Talkie's phrase, they're obsolete. And here's where I think we really have to do some better thinking about how to do that. And I think there are a lot of good ideas I want to take back with me as I think about them, about how we revise that social contract, how we think about what needs to be done in terms of government and what doesn't need to be done. But that is, I think, the fundamental, probably the single biggest issue what we might think of as the next FCC is going to have to address. And let me just close with a quote from Lincoln. You all might think that this is just a cheap attempt to appeal to Republicans in the audience. It's actually a cheap attempt to appeal to someone who may become the next chair, who happens to be a great fan of Lincoln. But the quote, which is a very familiar one to at least him, who's not in the room, by the way, is that the dogmas of the quiet present are not adequate, or the dogmas of the quiet past are not adequate for the stormy present. As the case is new, we must think anew and act anew. And I think that the redefinition of what we want out of networks that we fundamentally deploy with private investment, yet nonetheless produce huge public goods, as Senator Rubio said, or as Chairman Powell implied, that is really a very large challenge. It continues to be with us, and I think it is the fundamental task for all of us in this room to try to figure out how to both simultaneously to get the benefits of thinking like a hedgehog, while at the same time we analyze things like a fox. Randy, thank you very much.
Blair, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Those were very generous remarks, and I can tell you were listening intently to everything that went on, and I appreciate it. I do want to say this. Blair alluded to the next FCC chair. We all seem to be assuming there'll be one soon. And, you know, it's been about, I'm trying to think. It's been about 4 or 5 months since President Obama asked me for any advice. But you know, if he does, I mean, without taking anything away from any of the other people that are mentioned in the papers, and those who quote Lincoln or those who don't, you know, I will say that I think you would make a very fine FCC chairperson. Now, having said that, if it happens that you are FCC chair, you've been coming to our conferences for a long time, and you said we provoke your thinking, and you know, hopefully we do some educating. So I just want to, and I'm not even going to give you a chance to respond, but I'm going to sort of end with this thought, because I love the way you set up, you know, the notion of oscillation between regulatory uncertainty, which you hear a lot about, you know, in previous years, and then the talk we had today often about not being able to predict the future, you know, whether we were quoting Yogi Berra or Lincoln, and I like that, and that's very good. But here's what I would say, and I think it's, you know, because, you know, we know that you and I do agree on a lot of things, but I think oftentimes when there's a disagreement, I was thinking about it when you were talking about the oscillation, because in my mind, when you can't predict the future very well, essentially, and when you don't have some clear market failure, which then, you know, we would agree regulation would be appropriate, then sort of the default position in that case, particularly when the market is increasingly dynamic and you can't predict the future, then sort of the default position would be don't regulate, where I think at some point in the past, the default position in those circumstances might have been to regulate, but you get to a point, and when you talked about oscillation, it just made me think of it that way, that where the default position becomes more deregulatory. But now, since I paid for this mic, I'm not even going to, you don't need to respond. Your remarks were really terrific, and I'm really grateful. And unless you think that I'm glad with those remarks that you are closing. But as Blair knows, I actually invited him to speak about 4 months ago, and he didn't believe he could. And there was a schedule change, and I'm happy that you were able to be here, really. So with that, now we're going to close up. Just a reminder, there are books. Our latest book is out on the desk. It's on sale for $15. That's the lowest priced ever for that book. In fact, I don't think it's going to ever be below that. So if you don't have it, pick up a copy. And I just want to thank, I think it's been a terrific day. We're going to have video, the videos will be up. We've got a transcription that will be coming out later after the videos. I know Senator Rubio said he was putting his speech up on YouTube, I think. So it's been a terrific day, and I just want to thank all of you for being here. We'll see you hopefully before next year's annual conference, because we do events during the year. But having said that, I'm looking forward to having you all back next year when we do our 6th annual Free State Foundation Telecom Conference. Thanks a lot.